Danny Harris and Lee Morgan were just two ambitious young men chasing a fortune they thought was theirs for the taking. They had no idea that the house they were about to raid belonged to one of Manchester's most ruthless gangs, and that a single wrong move would turn their dream into a nightmare that nobody would survive. In the heart of Manchester, rows of semi-detached houses stood silently, their curtains drawn at all hours of the day. To neighbors, they looked neglected, maybe abandoned, with gardens overgrown and letterboxes taped shut. But behind those heavy doors, a different world thrived. Criminal gangs had transformed ordinary homes into sophisticated cannabis farms, each one a carefully hidden engine of profit. It was a business that operated in plain sight yet remained invisible to most. The smell of damp earth and chemicals seeped faintly into the air, but for anyone walking past, it was easy to dismiss as nothing more than the odor of neglect. Inside these houses, the scale was staggering. Living rooms had been stripped bare, their furniture discarded or piled in sheds, making room for rows of plants. The glow of powerful lights cast an unnatural yellow hue across the walls, humming day and night without pause. Ventilation systems snaked through the ceilings, fans buzzing to maintain the perfect temperature, while makeshift irrigation pipes trickled water at precise intervals. The electricity meters were tampered with, often bypassed entirely, ensuring the power ran free and undetected. What had once been family homes were now industrial-scale farms, pumping out product worth tens of thousands every few months. For the gangs running them, the houses were more than just investments. They were lifelines in an industry that thrived on secrecy and fear. Each house represented risk, but also reward. Some belonged to large organized crime groups, their operations stretching across multiple cities, each property just one cog in a bigger machine. Others were run by smaller crews, who rented or took over homes, sometimes even exploiting vulnerable tenants to keep the locations secure. Violence was the thread that held it all together. A grow house was never just left alone, it was guarded, watched, and protected like treasure. The signs were always there for those who knew what to look for. Curtains that never opened, windows that fogged up even in the dead of winter. The constant whir of fans. Electricity companies sometimes noticed the spikes in usage, and police raids occasionally uncovered hidden farms. But for every one that was found, dozens more remained untouched, buried deep in residential streets where no one thought to look. The sheer scale was enough to overwhelm the authorities. What the public never saw was how these hidden farms fueled a much darker chain of events. The money was vast, and with it came greed. Rival crews circled like vultures, always looking for the chance to strike. Grow house raiding became a dangerous underground sport, where fortune could change overnight. For the raiders, a single successful hit could mean hundreds of thousands in product, but raiding also meant crossing invisible lines. To steal from a grow house wasn't just theft, it was a declaration of war. And in Manchester during those years, wars were brewing quietly behind boarded-up windows. Each farm was both a gold mine and a potential graveyard. What began as a secret way to make money would soon ignite something far bloodier. Something no one in those quiet streets could have imagined. In the criminal underworld, news traveled faster than most people could imagine. Word of a successful grow house did not stay secret for long. Whispers spread in pubs, prison yards, and through encrypted phones. And before the week was over, rival crews in Liverpool knew about the property in Manchester that was overflowing with cannabis plants. These men were not gardeners or patient investors, they were opportunists, living for quick cash and willing to take whatever risks it demanded. For them, raiding a grow house was easier than robbing a bank. No alarms, no guards in uniforms, just a few men to intimidate and a crop ready to be stripped. The crew from Liverpool had been circling the drug trade for years, small-time hustlers who wanted more. They had grown tired of being middlemen, always scraping for crumbs while bigger players enjoyed the real profits. The idea of hitting a grow house was intoxicating. It promised wealth in a single night, money that could not be earned by weeks of street dealing. The more they heard about this particular house, the more convinced they became that it was worth the risk. It was said to contain a crop valued close to £500,000, one of the biggest hauls of the season. To them, it wasn't just another job, it was the chance to climb the ladder. But ambition can blind a man. What the raiders didn't realize was that the property belonged to one of the most ruthless gangs in the north. This wasn't a small operation or a casual grow set up by amateurs. It was a carefully protected business, guarded by men with reputations built on violence. These gangs had built their names not only through profits, but through fear, making sure anyone who dared cross them regretted it. To raid their property was to strike at their pride, and in that world, pride mattered as much as money. The Liverpool crew did not care. To them, this was simply business. They studied the house for weeks, watching who came and went, noting when the guards changed shifts, and calculating how quickly they could get in and out. The excitement grew each day, feeding their egos, making them believe they were untouchable. They joked about how they would spend the money, how they would flaunt it in clubs, how they would finally be seen as players instead of nobodies. The possibility of retaliation never entered their minds. On the other side, the owners of the farm also heard the whispers. They knew someone had an eye on their property and they were prepared. But instead of pulling the crop early or moving it to safety, they let the house remain as bait, confident that if anyone dared to strike, the punishment would be swift and unforgettable. They understood something the raiders did not. In the drug trade, money can be replaced, but reputation cannot. It was in this fragile balance of greed and pride that the seeds of violence were sown. The raiders saw fortune, the growers saw betrayal. What neither side realized was that this small act of theft would trigger a chain of events that would spiral far beyond a simple robbery. It would mark the beginning of something brutal, something irreversible, a war that would end in blood rather than profit. The night of the raid was bitterly cold, the kind of chill that clung to the air and made every sound sharper. The Liverpool crew gathered in 2 stolen vans, their faces hidden under balaclavas, their weapons tucked into coats and bags. Each man carried the same mixture of fear and excitement, hearts pounding with the knowledge that by morning they could be rich beyond anything they had ever known. They had planned the job down to the minute, timing the guards' routines and mapping the quickest route in and out. For them it felt like certainty. What they didn't know was how fast certainty could shatter. When they reached the street, the house looked as it always had, curtains drawn, no lights, no signs of life. The neighbors were asleep, unaware that violence was about to unfold just a few doors away. With a sudden burst, the raiders forced the front door open, the crash echoing like thunder in the silence of the night. Inside, the stale air hit them instantly, damp, sweet, unmistakable. The house was packed from wall to wall with cannabis plants, their leaves stretching towards the artificial glow of lights. For the crew, the sight was intoxicating. This was the treasure they had dreamed of, rows upon rows of green worth hundreds of thousands. But they were not alone. 2 guards had been stationed inside, men tasked with protecting the crop. Startled by the break-in, they tried to fight back, one armed with a makeshift bat, the other with a knife. The raiders were ready. Armed with hammers, crowbars, and machetes, they overpowered the guards with brutal speed. Shouts, grunts, and the sickening thud of metal on flesh filled the rooms as the men clashed among the plants. In minutes, the guards were on the ground, beaten and bound, left helpless as the invaders turned their focus to the prize. The operation moved quickly. Some of the crew began hacking down plants, bundling them into bags, while others carried them to the waiting vans outside. The glow of the grow lights spilled through the open door, lighting up the street, but still, no one came. Within half an hour, the vans were filled to the roof, the sheer weight of the crop bending the suspension. The men moved with frantic energy, laughing under their masks, adrenaline coursing through their veins. To them it was victory. They had taken the house, taken the plants, and humiliated the guards without losing a man. As they sped away into the night, the sense of triumph was overwhelming. Their laughter echoed inside the vans, their talk filled with plans of what to do with the money once the product was sold. They felt invincible, like kings of the street, but what they didn't see was the other side of the story. The moment the beaten guards reported back to their bosses, the anger that boiled in the hearts of men who had just lost nearly £500,000. For the growers, this wasn't simply theft, it was disrespect, a direct attack on their empire. In the criminal world, disrespect carried a price heavier than money. The Liverpool crew thought they had pulled off the perfect score, but in reality, they had signed their own death warrants. The raid had been a success on the surface, but underneath it marked the beginning of something far darker. Retaliation wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. The gang whose house had been robbed would not rest until their message was delivered, and their message would be written in blood. The morning after the raid, Manchester woke to an ordinary grey sky, unaware that violence had unfolded in its quiet street. But for the gang whose grow house had been attacked, the day was anything but ordinary. The loss was immense. Not just the money, but the principle. In their world, a stolen crop was more than material. It was a statement of weakness, and weakness invited chaos. The crew who had stolen from them had made a mistake, a fatal one. Yet instead of striking immediately, the growers chose a different path. They sent warnings first, subtle and deliberate, hoping the raiders would understand that retaliation was inevitable. Cars were torched outside Liverpool properties known to belong to the raiders' associates, windows shattered with precision, and messages left where they would be found, symbols and signs meant to send fear without revealing direct threats. These warnings were carefully crafted, a silent scream from the growers to the thieves. We know who you are, and we will not forget. In the underground networks of the drug trade, reputation was everything. A grow house could be replaced, money could be earned again. But a reputation lost was permanent. The growers understood this better than anyone. But the raiders were reckless, emboldened by the success of their heist. Confidence had replaced caution, and they ignored the signs that danger was closing in. The warnings that should have sent them scrambling were instead met with arrogance. They flaunted their recent gains at clubs, posted pictures on encrypted networks, and shared details of the raid in conversations they believed were private. To them, nothing could touch them. They were untouchable, a crew of young men who had outsmarted the system, or so they thought. The irony was that every boast, every brag, only drew the attention of their victims closer. The growers, patient and calculating, watched from the shadows, noting patterns, observing routes, and planning carefully. Unlike the raiders, who acted on impulse, the growers treated the situation like a chess game. Each warning was a move, designed to bait the raiders into overconfidence, to make them believe they were safe and in control. Every detail mattered, from the timing of the messages to the placement of the torched cars. It was psychological warfare, designed to exploit the arrogance that had fueled the raid. Meanwhile, the raiders continued to prepare for their next big hit. They believed they were untouchable, that their speed and planning made them invisible. But what they failed to see was that their success had painted a target on their. The house they had robbed wasn't just another grow operation, it was a stronghold. Those who controlled it had no intention of being robbed again, and they were willing to do whatever it took to enforce their dominance. This dangerous mix of arrogance and strategy set the stage for what would come next. The raiders were walking into a world they didn't understand, where money was only the beginning, and violence was the rule. By ignoring the warnings, they were not just tempting fate, they were inviting a reckoning. And in the criminal underworld, a reckoning was rarely merciful. The stage was set for an escalation that would turn what started as a simple theft into something far more brutal and unforgettable, a cycle of retribution that would leave no one untouched. The days following the warnings were tense, a silent countdown that neither side could ignore. The Liverpool crew, drunk on their recent success, believed they had learned nothing from the threats. Instead, they saw opportunity. A tip had come through a mysterious contact, someone claiming knowledge of another grow house, even bigger than the first, lightly guarded and ready for the taking. To the raiders, It was too perfect to resist. Greed and ambition drowned caution, and their minds were consumed by the thought of another haul, another victory to cement their reputation. They studied the house, analyzing the schedule of guards, the layout of the rooms, and the narrow street that led to it. Every detail was noted, every potential escape route calculated. The contact who had provided the information insisted on accompanying them. At first, the raiders hesitated. An unknown third party increased the risk, but the allure of easy money was stronger than fear. They accepted, believing they had found a valuable ally, a source of insider knowledge that would ensure their success. What they did not realize was that this ally was no friend at all. The contact was a plant, working for the original growers, sent to manipulate them into walking straight into a trap. Meanwhile, the growers prepared meticulously. They knew the raiders would be eager, arrogant, and predictable. Using their planted contact, they fed the thieves just enough information to make the plan seem foolproof. Every guard, every door, every alarm system had been staged for the ambush. The house itself was a lure, a promise of untold wealth meant to draw the raiders into a controlled environment where escape would be impossible. Every detail had been orchestrated to ensure that once the raiders arrived, there would be no way out. The tension among the raiders grew as the night approached. Excitement and fear mingled, hearts racing with anticipation. They felt invincible, convinced that their skill and planning would see them through, but the air was thick with danger, the unseen eyes of the growers tracking every move, every whispered conversation. The crew crossed city lines with a confidence that blinded them to the peril waiting on the other side of the door. They were no longer merely thieves, they were intruders stepping into a battlefield designed specifically to punish them. Back in Manchester, the growers watched and waited. The preparation was thorough, the stage set perfectly. They had learned from the first raid, understanding that revenge was not just about recovery of property, it was about sending a message. The trap was about more than money. It was about authority, about showing anyone who dared challenge them that such audacity came at the highest cost. Every step the raiders took was anticipated, every hesitation exploited. In the early hours, the Liverpool crew approached the house, unaware that their fate had been sealed long before they crossed the threshold. They believed they were about to claim another fortune, oblivious to the fact that what awaited them was no robbery. It was punishment. The contact who had guided them in was no longer a helper, but a gatekeeper to the most lethal surprise of their lives. The trap had been set, the bait taken, and the night was about to turn from opportunity into horror. The night air was heavy and still, carrying an unnatural quiet as the Liverpool crew crept toward the house. Their nerves were taut with anticipation, each man gripping his weapon and imagining the fortune waiting inside. The street was empty, the shadows long and deep, and for a moment it felt like they were walking through a dream, one that promised wealth but concealed a nightmare. They moved quickly, relying on the intelligence of their contact, unaware that every step was being watched by men who had planned this moment for days, every detail calibrated for maximum control. As they forced open the front door, the familiar smell of damp and chemicals hit them. They expected the empty rooms and easily subdued guards that had marked their previous raid. Instead, the lights snapped on suddenly, blinding and harsh. Armed figures emerged from the shadows, their movements precise and coordinated. Panic erupted instantly. The raiders fired blindly, but the ambushers were prepared, protected by makeshift barriers and the advantage of surprise. The room that had once promised riches had transformed into a trap, a cage with no escape. Chaos reigned. Screams, shouts, and the sickening sounds of violence filled the air. The raiders tried to fight back, but the ambushers had anticipated every move. One man fell instantly, struck before he could react. Another attempted to flee, only to be forced back into the heart of the house. The sense of invincibility that had carried them through previous raids dissolved in an instant, replaced by raw terror. What had started as a mission to claim wealth had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. The ambushers moved with ruthless efficiency. Every raider was targeted systematically, each encounter designed to break resistance and instill fear. The house, once a symbol of opportunity, became a chamber of execution. The raiders realized too late that this was not a robbery gone wrong but a planned retribution. Their so-called contact revealed the betrayal with no hesitation, guiding the attackers to every weak point, leaving no room for mercy. Panic turned to despair as the crew understood the truth. There was no escape. Outside, the vans remained untouched, the loot irrelevant. In the cold night, the street waited silently, as if complicit in the horror unfolding inside. The attackers took no chances, ensuring that every possible witness was neutralized. The raid, which had been meant to bring profit, had transformed into a lesson in absolute control. The original growers had demonstrated that in their world, power and fear outweighed any monetary gain. The message was clear: challenge them, and death was guaranteed. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the house was silent again. The sounds of struggle had been replaced by an eerie stillness, the chaos hidden behind locked doors and shadows. The Liverpool crew, once so confident and bold, had vanished, some dead, some captured, all humbled. The growers had reclaimed their authority without losing a single member, their meticulous planning ensuring complete dominance. Outside, the quiet street betrayed nothing of the horrors that had occurred just hours before, leaving the wider world unaware that an execution, not a robbery, had taken place. The ambush marked a turning point, not just for the raiders, but for the reputation of the gangs involved. Word of what had happened would spread through the underworld like wildfire, a cautionary tale of greed, arrogance, and the lethal consequences of underestimating the wrong people. From this night forward, grow house raids would no longer be seen as simple thefts. They would be understood as deadly gambles, where one wrong move could mean the end. By the following morning, the quiet streets surrounding the ambushed grow house gave no hint of the horrors that had unfolded just hours before. The house itself had been emptied of any trace of evidence. Vans that had once carried stolen crops were gone, replaced by smoldering wrecks in nearby abandoned lots. Inside, the plants had been stripped, the lights torn down, and the ventilation systems dismantled. Every sign of the violent encounter had been methodically erased. To an outsider, it was as if nothing had happened, just another boarded-up house in a sleepy Manchester suburb. The authorities were left with nothing. There were no bodies, no crime scene to investigate, and no witnesses willing to speak. Those who had seen or heard anything had learned long ago that silence was safety. In the shadowy world of the grow house trade, people rarely interfered. Fear kept them in line. Families and neighbors went about their routines, oblivious to the calculated retribution that occurred in the very street where children played and cars passed by every day. The disappearances of the raiders became a mystery, their fates hidden in layers of planning and intimidation. The families of the missing men searched frantically. Calls went unanswered. Friends vanished, and theories began to circulate. Some suggested the men had gone into hiding, scared of rival crews. Others whispered of more sinister possibilities. Every lead, however, dissolved into frustration and despair. There was no evidence to track, no traces to follow. The operation had been so thorough that the authorities were left frustrated and baffled, unable to make sense of the sudden absence of a crew that had been so confident and bold just nights before. Meanwhile, in the criminal underworld, the story spread like wildfire. The raid-turned-execution became a cautionary tale, discussed in hushed tones in pubs, back alleys, and encrypted chat rooms. The message was clear: in this trade, arrogance was punished, and no one could challenge the wrong people without paying the ultimate price. The growers' meticulous planning and ruthless efficiency were now legend. Anyone contemplating a similar strike would think twice, understanding that these were not petty criminals. They were a force operating with precision and lethal intent. The cover-up was not just about erasing evidence, it was about controlling perception. The growers wanted their enemies, and potential enemies, to understand that they were untouchable. The disappearances, the destruction, the meticulous cleanup all contributed to a narrative of fear. To the outside world, nothing had happened. But within the circles of crime, a powerful message had been delivered. The incident would be referenced for years, not only as an example of what happens when greed overtakes caution, but also as a demonstration of strategic dominance. Even the surviving members of the Liverpool crew, if any remained, were forced underground. No one knew where they were, and those who might have spoken were either too frightened or already silenced. The houses they once frequented were abandoned, their belongings gone, and their contacts avoided any association with them. The growers had won completely, leaving no loose end. The quiet Manchester street, once ordinary, had become a stage for a chilling reminder. In the world of grow houses, control was absolute, and violations were met with ruthless, untraceable consequences. The aftermath of the ambush changed the landscape of the local criminal trade forever. The story of the raid was no longer about stolen crops, it was about fear, dominance, and survival. Every gang, every crew, and every opportunist learned the same lesson. A grow house was more than property, it was power, and power demanded respect. To ignore that was to invite annihilation. The story of the ambushed Liverpool crew and the ruthless growers spread slowly at first, whispered in pubs, over intrepid phones, and across back alleys. But as the weeks passed, it became legend in the criminal underworld. The execution of the raiders was more than revenge. It was a warning carved into the very fabric of the UK's hidden drug trade. Those who heard it understood immediately that a grow house was no longer just a source of money, it was a fortress, a symbol of authority, and anyone who challenged it without permission risked death. The families of the missing men were left with haunting questions that had no answers. Parents, siblings, and partners searched tirelessly, knocking on doors and asking friends, only to find silence or fear in return. Law enforcement had nothing to go on. No bodies, no crime scene, no evidence. The raiders' fates became almost mythic, a terrifying story of ambition and arrogance punished in the most final way. The lack of closure only deepened the horror. For those left behind, the absence was a living nightmare, a reminder that the underworld could claim lives and leave nothing to trace the crime. The growers' victory reshaped the balance of power. Other crews learned quickly that the penalties for raiding the wrong house were swift and absurd. A single mistake could wipe out a team, erase an entire operation, and send a clear message to anyone who thought they could take what was not theirs. It was a brutal code, enforced without hesitation and without witnesses. Word of the ambush spread beyond Manchester and Liverpool, reaching the criminal networks of London, Birmingham, and Glasgow. Anyone involved in the grow house trade knew that respect, caution, and discretion were not optional. They were essential for survival. Even within the growers' own ranks, the operation reinforced discipline. The leaders had demonstrated control, meticulous planning, and ruthless efficiency. New recruits were taught the story as a lesson. Greed and arrogance could destroy even the boldest criminals. The raid that had begun as a simple theft became a benchmark for the limits of audacity. No one would dare challenge them again, and the legacy of the event became part of the folklore of UK gangs, a story repeated with a mixture of awe and fear in every corner of the underworld. For the wider public, life went on without notice. To neighbors and local communities, the streets remained quiet, ordinary, and mundane. No one suspected that behind closed doors, blood had been shed and lives had vanished without a trace. The contrast between the everyday calm and the violence hidden within created a chilling sense of the invisible world that thrived alongside ordinary life. Grow houses, in their secrecy, were both ordinary homes and deadly fortresses, a duality most people could not comprehend. Ultimately, the story of the Liverpool crew became more than a tale of money and crime. It became a lesson in power, fear, and survival. It revealed the true stakes of the grow house trade. Wealth was fleeting, betrayal was punished, and control was absolute. In the shadowy corridors of the UK's criminal networks, the event served as a dark reminder that ambition without caution could lead to disappearance, violence, and death. The ambush, the cover-up, and the untraceable execution of the raiders ensured that the legend would never fade. The ghosts of the trade haunted those who survived, and the lesson remained etched in the underworld forever. In this world, respect was survival, and failure was permanent. Even years later, the story of the raid and the ruthless execution was told in hushed tones, a chilling tale of what happens when greed collides with power and the wrong house is chosen.